Here at NRL Offside, JC, innovation never sleeps. Mate, we are always looking for ways to take our listeners in new and exciting directions. And mate, that was certainly the case with our last episode. Now, we have a long, inglorious history. I mean, the show's only gone for 16 episodes, but a relatively long and inglorious history of being gazumped. Mate, we were gazumped on the Ivan Cleary resignation. A few weeks after that, we were gazumped on the news that Jerome Luai had signed with Papua New Guinea. Mate, it is not going to happen again. So last week, we stepped up and added a section after the recording to accommodate the breaking news, or maybe the news that we missed, about Hamali Olakuatu's exclusion from the New South Wales team. Mate, I thought it was a great little addition, but Johnny, every action has a reaction. We put that emergency origin addendum in, and it meant that we had to make some changes to our program. Mate, we had to leave off our original end sequence. Now, I'm going to start to veer into ridiculous tangent territory here, John. It might be a little bit early in the program, but mate, Michael Jackson's obviously been in the news over the last few months with the release of the Michael movie. Mate, it's come to light that Quincy Jones, who, as you know, is the producer of Thriller, mate, he was going to leave the 29-second introduction to Billie Jean off. And then they listened to it and they thought, well, this is way too good. Mate, it was the same with our end sequence last week. So we just have to build it into this week's introduction. In addition to that, I never miss an opportunity to get stuck into the Melbourne Storm. So here it is, listeners. Craig Bellamy as Lord Voldemort and the Melbourne Storm as Death Eaters. Now, there were a few reasons we rushed that segment into the show, JC. The first is that let's spend time doing it. I'm going to be frank here. But the second is that we wanted to make sure it remained topical. But mate, when I was actually watching that back, I think that probably could have been topical at any point over the last 25 years. Mate, I mean, this might start to veer into self-indulgence here, but I also love the fact that the Melbourne Storm insignia had changed into Voldemort's dark mark. Anyway, Johnny, mate, rescue this introduction from my esoteric egomania. Mate, how are you? What's going on in your world?
Hello, listeners, and hello, Noz. All good on my side. For me, it was a big weekend of sport, not just NRL, and I definitely clocked up plenty of viewing hours on the big screen, and probably had a few more beers than usual. Mate, a big congratulations to the Socceroos. I'm sure you would have watched that on that, mate. That was an epic win in the opening match against Turkey. Absolutely brilliant to watch. Mate, I can't say the same for my Roosters, but more on that a bit later on. And as always, Captain Noz, mate, over to you to kick off our set, mate.
Mate, we're going to kick off as we always do with speed round. Mate, we've got a new mantra for speed round. I feel the need for speed. Mate, we probably need to keep repeating that to ourselves because the speed round actually went for 7 minutes last week. Mate, it's plumbing new lows or probably new slows. What caught our eye? Mate, lots of interesting things to discuss over the round of football. You're going to head over the ditch to talk about the game in NZ, but I want to look at two teams heading in different directions. The results might have seemed similar, but in reality, one's going in one direction, the other's going in the other. The grapple, mate, Origin, just around the corner. We're going to have our final Origin predictions at the round preview. You and I were chatting about this. Mate, I put the insane budgerigard back in the cage over the weekend. I got 4 out of 5, which is almost unprecedented considering how bad I normally am at tipping. Mate, you didn't. It seemed like you let the budgerigard loose with your tipping. We're going to be flying the friendly skies again this week. Hopefully our game selections won't nosedive, but we'll get to that later in the show. And free balling. Now, Johnny, it's back to me this week. I think, again, we're going to have to do a little bit of a pivot. So there were some serious things that happened in the game over the last week. Freeballing probably doesn't quite fit. Mate, we might have the appearance of a new mini segment, the wit and wisdom of Noz, but listeners, again, you're going to have to stick around to the end of the episode to see that. But on to speed round, JC. Now, mate, the new theme was a raging success. Thanks to Neil, our Roosters fan in Switzerland. Mate, we are eternally grateful that he took time out from rerouting payments for Teddy and DCE through Zurich to sort of give us that idea. Mate, in good news, it also didn't catch the attention of Paramount Pictures, meaning that we can repeat it again this week.
I feel the need for speed.
Let's go to the Rabbitohs versus the Broncos. I did something pretty stupid here, and I've always said I should never do this, but just before kickoff, I changed my tip to the Broncos. As you know, it backfired badly. The Rabbitohs absolutely belted the Broncos in what was, pretty emotional pre-game setting with Jai Arrow. That the Rabbitohs did a great job there. Cody Walker, I thought, turn back the clock. Alex Johnson, well, he just keeps still finding the try line. He bagged 4 to be exact. As for the Broncos, they were dreadful. I honestly can't see them making the 8 based on that performance. I actually think their season is over. Look, I think now it's that sort of second year syndrome with Madge. So let's see what happens to the Broncos from here on. And I can almost see Gordon Tallis smiling right down on the situation at the moment. Let's move to the Dolphins versus the Roosters. I want to start by saying, even though I always tip the Roosters every week, deep down, I knew this was going to be a pretty difficult task. So many of our main players were out due to Origin, and obviously we're also blooding, quite a number of young kids. To be honest, some of those guys I'd never even seen before. But I certainly didn't expect the Finns to smash us that convincingly. To be honest, look, these Dolphins guys, mate, they're the real deal. Even though they were missing some of their Origin players, they looked very, very good. Katoa was sensational. He was just toying with the Roosters at times, and they absolutely cut us open in the second half. Let's move to the Warriors versus the Sharks. Wow, mate, what a game! Not your usual high-scoring shootout either. Mate, this was tough, physical football, played in, pretty difficult wet conditions there in Auckland. I need to probably eat some humble pie here because I said last week about the Sharks that I really couldn't quite get a read on how they're going at the moment because, let's be honest, they hadn't really beaten anybody at the top of the leaderboard. Well, they answered that pretty clearly last week by going over to New Zealand and beating the Warriors. Over to you, mate.
Eels versus Raiders. Well, John, I actually watched this game on delay. Mate, I was at the St Mary's night markets, which I'd like to add were quite delightful. But, mate, the first half was worth the wait. Parramatta's suffocating defence, and I'm just going to say that again. It's probably the first time this season I've had the opportunity to say it. It may well be the last. Parramatta's suffocating defence shut the Raiders out in the first half, leading to a rarely seen 9-0 lead at the main break. Johnny, then we had the second half. Mate, I'm not sure what was worse for my heart, the 8 kilos of pork that I had in my Hawaiian snack pack or Ronald Volkman's second half game management. Mate, an extended sequence of abysmal last play kick options from Volk and Joash Papali, his halves partner, led the Raiders back into the game. But luckily, the Raiders were faithful to their 2026 selves and put on an absolute dunce's class in attack, epitomised by Dane Laurie's last gasp pass, which missed its mark by about 3 metres. Mate, that magic dust that was sprinkled on Canberra in 25 has well and truly worn off in 26. Yet again, they were breathtakingly mediocre as they have been all season. And I think they're now facing a fight to avoid finishing in the bottom 3. And you know what, JC? It warms my heart to say this, but I think the Eels might just avoid that particular indignity. Tigers versus Titans. Mate, the weather might have been patchy on Sunday, but Leichhardt Oval was literally sparkling for its last game before it goes into a 2-year hiatus for a much-needed refurb. And what a game it was to bring it all to a temporary end. Mate, the Tigers, well, thankfully, they left their wet paper bag defence at Combank and instead showed exactly what they are good at, playing with speed and verve over the first 30 minutes to run to a 12-point lead. But that was far from the end of the story, JC. Keanu Kinney, the man you dubbed the babyface assassin last week, he pulled out his throwing stars, blow darts and piano wire and put on an all-out assault. Over 10 hysterical minutes leading into the halftime break, he adroitly sliced through the Tigers' interior defence like the Roman senators carving up Julius Caesar, leading to an unlikely Titans lead at the half. However, there was another twist in the tale, and this one was wearing headgear and had flowing locks. Jerome Luai, perhaps stung by a week's worth of pretty justified criticism, well, he took the game by the horns in the second 40. He ran in 3 of the Tigers' 4 second-half tries, including the one that iced the game in the final minute. And, Johnny, I think we were in the group that bagged him last week. Perhaps it was us that he was telling to shut the F up. But Johnny, mate, we won't be silenced here at NRL Offsides. What caught your eye?
For me, it was from the Sharks and the Warriors game. I mentioned earlier that was probably one of the Sharks' gutsiest wins in a pretty long time. And when Braden Trindle and Will Kennedy are in the side, it really gives the Sharks a genuine chance. This game was an absolute epic, especially the way it ended with the scores locked at 8-8 near the end. Tiari Martin nails a field goal attempt to try and win it, but somehow Will Kennedy pulls off the unthinkable, a charge down, which is pretty tough these days, and then he regathers the ball. It was an absolute incredible piece of play, especially with the game deep
Mhm.
into the final minutes. Then
Yep.
Braden Trindle steps up and lands a 40-plus metre field goal to put the Sharks ahead 10-8 late in the match. I was watching this game thinking, mate, without those two players in the side, Kennedy and Trindle, I really think the Sharks would struggle to make the top eight. It's that simple. What they produced at the end of that game was absolutely off the charts. And then there was even more drama with the Warriors centre. The Warriors got a penalty. He had a penalty goal attempt, and he just sort of shaded to the side. So, mate, it was a great game, great finish, and mate, 10 out of 10 to Will Kennedy and Braden Trindle.
Mate, what caught my eye over the weekend is something that you're probably going to be happy to hear. You were uncharacteristically scathing about your Roosters and their performance over the weekend. But I don't think it was as bad as you were saying. This is, again, me being optimistic about the Roosters and you not, which is a bit of a role reversal. But, mate, last week, there were two teams that had similarly shocking results, but, mate, I think they're heading in different directions. And that's the Roosters and the Broncos. Now, in terms of their games last weekend, they were pretty much on a hiding to nothing. They were facing pretty good opposition away, and they didn't have the bulk of their lineup. Mate, there was a similarity in scorelines. Brisbane were beaten by 42 points by the Rabbitohs. The Chooks were beaten by 38 points by Redcliffe. But, mate, to me, the games just felt different. Brisbane, you mentioned it in speed round. Mate, they were a dispirited rabble. They played without anything even resembling heart or inspiration. Now, this is going to sound a little bit harsh, Johnny, but so be it. Mate, I think they were best represented by Jack Gasiewski. Jack Gasiewski, I mean, he's had a 100-game NRL career. He's played at a few clubs. But for me, he is the very definition of a plod. Mate, at this point of his career, he's almost like a walking concussion. And, mate, if he is playing in your team in any capacity, it really bodes poorly. Mate, the Roosters, on the other hand, yeah, they leaked a few points, but, mate, I think they were best epitomised by young Rex Bassingthwaite. Now, I know the commentators had trouble with his name all night, but I thought I did pretty well. And Bassingthwaite, mate, but Bassingthwaite came in, he's 19 years old, he was raw, mate, he made some mistakes, but he was irrepressible. He gained over 100 metres on the ground. He scored a pretty tidy try in the second half. And, mate, I think he was emblematic of what we saw from the Roosters. With the Origin rounds, mate, I view them as a gauge as to how the club is travelling and the spirit in the club. And, mate, just watching those two games, it might have been intangible, but I saw two teams that were vastly different. I saw a Roosters team, yeah, they made mistakes. Ultimately, the scoreline was pretty heavily weighed against them, but there were certainly things there which you would have looked at and thought, yeah, this team's going somewhere. I thought Brisbane were the exact opposite. And I think that's a preview of what the rest of the season holds, mate. So you'd be pretty happy to hear that, JC. Okay, on to the grapple. Okay, we've got our final Origin predictions here, Johnny. By the time this show goes to air, there'll be a few hours before Origin 2. But who's going to win and why are they going to win?
Look, I think Blues wrap up the series in Melbourne. I said last week, if they start strongly and limit errors, I really think the Blues could win comfortably down in Melbourne. I am hearing it is going to be a little bit wet, so that might just change things a little bit. I really want to see, mate, our attacking sort of game at full tilt. I hope they play with a little bit more confidence, and mate, we need to let the talent in this team really shine. I'm so happy that Marky
Mm.
Mark is in the side. I really hope Nathan has been practicing the aerial assault into the corner because I really think Marky Mark's going to be a massive, massive weapon. So, yeah, I think the Blues will go up 2-0 after Melbourne. I think Cleary, I think he's on track for man of the series. So I hope he gets man of the match in the Melbourne match. And then we head up to Suncorp, and hopefully we can make it a whitewash, which we haven't done for a long, long time. So go the Blues down in Melbourne.
I got a question for you here. So this is the sixth game that's been played at the MCG. But how many of those games has New South Wales won, do you think?
From memory, I think we got a pretty good track record down there. I know we had that big result with Madge coaching a few years back. I'm going to say 3 or 4 we've probably won.
Yeah, mate, we've actually won 4 of the 5 games at the MCG. So New South Wales have been traditionally dominant playing down in Melbourne. You have to go all the way back to 1995 for a Maroon victory, and that was the famous clean sweep of Fatty Neville's. So, mate, if you're looking at it from a historical perspective, you'd have to say New South Wales. And, mate, you'd probably have to say New South Wales quite comfortably. But I do have some predictions, JC. You knew these were coming, mate. The first, and we talked about this last week, mate, I'm really looking forward to the matchup of Tino and Haas. Mate, I think Tino will absolutely go at Haas. It's a mouthwatering clash. Mate, in terms of matchups, out in the backs as well, mate, Kula and Toya, they're both fantastic young footballers. They're really starting to come into their own. Mate, it isn't quite at the level of Gasnier and Inglis, but it does have that potential. I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, you would have remembered in the 2010s, mate, we used to look forward to Origin every single time because we knew that Gasnier and Inglis would really come on and put on a show. Mate, I think the same with Cooler and Rob Toyer. But I think Munster's going to be better. Munster has to be better. We mentioned in the review of Origin 1 that he was the worst player on the field. Mate, if he plays in that same vein, I actually think Billy Slater is going to be tempted to pull the trigger and put Ponga at 5'8" and Walsh at fullback. And speaking of Reece Walsh, mate, he has replaced Ezra Mam. Considering his current Broncos form, mate, that's a little bit like replacing a Leyland P76 with a Holden Chimera. But I am tipping everybody's favourite mercurial player to do a Bob Lindner, reverse his club form and have a blinder. I hope he doesn't, but I've just got that spidey sense that he's going to do so, Johnny. And, mate, Dylan Lucas. I probably needed to put something about Lucas in the emergency Origin addendum that we had last week. Mate, Lucas well and truly deserves his spot in the Origin squad. But
Agree.
I do think that New South Wales is going to miss the punch of Ola Kawadu. Ola Kawadu is enormous on that right edge. Again, he really bends the line. And I think New South Wales are going to have a gap in their attack as a result. But finally, my prediction, JC, mate, I think Queensland are going to reverse the historical trend in Melbourne. I think they're going to get over the Blues in a close one. I know we all want to see New South Wales win, but let's be honest here, JC, Origin is much, much better when it goes into the deciding game and there's something on the line. So I'm tipping the Queensland Maroons for this game. But I do have one more final question about Origin, JC. Mate, what are they doing in New South Wales Origin camp? So Casey McLean went out with a quad injury sustained at training. Mate, I think that's the third training camp injury that we've had in Origin over the last few years. Remember a few years back, Latrell Mitchell injured his calf and ended up being out for the rest of the season. Mitchell Moses has now done it twice. Mate, is it like Gladiator Training School? Is it like the Marines at Paris Island, Salusa Secundus? Mate, what exactly are they doing at New South Wales Origin camp? I'm sure the clubs aren't very impressed when their high-priced cattle actually get injuries and are then out for a prolonged period on the sideline. Come on, guys. Well, let's see if we can at least get our players into the starting gates. Okay, a little bit of controversy, Johnny. Always good to finish on a bit of controversy with the grapple. Mate, let's go into the round preview. What have you got for us?
Let's start with Knights versus the Dragons. Knights at home, I think with their, hopefully their Origin players back this week, they'll be way too strong for the Dragons. They're on a kind of 4-match winning streak, and I think 5 is definitely on the cards. Coach Holbrook, mate, this guy deserves plenty of credit for the turnaround this year, mate. He's done a great job in getting the Knights playing some pretty confident, consistent footy. And I think if they continue this rise and sort of finish high up in the top eight, I really think he'll be a strong contender for Coach of the Year with Kieran Foran. And so up the Knights. I think they'll be way too strong at home.
I think the Dragons have got one hope in this game, and that's that the Knights make the same number of simple mistakes they did against the Storm. Mate, they were great in that game, but time and time again, they dropped the ball or just made a mistake, which turned the momentum. Mate, if not, I think it's going to be an absolute bloodbath up in Newcastle. Mate, the potent Newcastle three-quarter line against the dreadful defence of Moses Sully and Val Holmes. Mate, this has the potential to be cataclysmic for the Saints. I'm going for Newcastle. I don't think that's a any surprise, but I think it is going to be a very long afternoon for St George.
Moses Sully is your new favourite player to bash, that's for sure. Okay, Tigers versus the Dolphins. As you mentioned before, look, the Tigers definitely needed to bounce back last week against the Titans, and they definitely delivered. Luai was quite brilliant, probably one of his top one or two best games for the Tigers since he's been there. The Dolphins, however, mate, let's be honest, they completely dismantled my guys last week, even though they were missing a few key players. Even though this one's been played at Campbelltown, I still think that the Dolphins will be way too strong. They just got too much firepower, and they'll probably end up putting on a bit of a scoreline come the second half.
Mate, I think despite their win last weekend, West still have some glaring defensive issues. They were really exposed by Keanu Kinney in that 10-minute period leading up to the half. They have stretches where they just completely lose focus. Now, with that in mind, I mean, I probably would have tipped the Dolphins anyway. As you were saying, they are one of the form teams at the moment, and they're really pushing towards that top four spot. But mate, with those defensive lapses that are still in the Tigers, mate, I think that the Dolphins are going to beat them quite easily.
Titans versus the Panthers. Mate, Penrith will win this one pretty comfortably. Which, to be honest, this is going to become probably the standard review for every one of their remaining games this season, with maybe the possible exception. I think if they play the Finns again, that might be the only one where it might be fairly close. Look, with their Origin players, I'm guessing backing up, Panthers will just have way too much class, and I've actually got a feeling this might be a cakewalk up there on the Gold Coast. So yeah, the Panthers by plenty in this one.
Yeah, mate. I mean, this is one of those games that we probably don't need to spend too much time talking about. This Titans team, they're nowhere near sturdy enough to test the Panthers. One of the wild cards is that there are not all of the Origin players back up for the Panthers, but mate, again, I just don't think they have anywhere near what's needed to even stretch this Penrith team. So I am going to go for the Panthers. And as with the previous few games, mate, I think it's going to be quite an easy victory.
Bulldogs versus the Seals. How quickly has the season turned around for both of these teams? Manly started the year quite disastrously with a few big losses at all at home. Well, the Dogs actually started the season quite strong, but look, the momentum has completely shifted for both these sides. The Seagulls have gone on a pretty amazing winning streak with Coach Foran now in charge. Well, mate, the Dogs, mate, they've hit a massive form slump, and they've also slipped into a bit of a losing streak. That last win they had over your guys, the Eels, I actually thought they were quite fortunate to get that win, to be honest. So look, I think Manly here at full strength, I can't see the Bulldogs getting anywhere near the Eagles in this game. So yeah, I think the Eagles will win this one quite comfortably.
Mate, I'm not talking about the Dogs anymore. I think they're gone for 26. I've already wasted way too much breath on them this year. Until they start to show some semblance of decent play, mate, again, I'm not going to give them any airtime. And I think that actually fits in quite nicely with this game as well. I think the real story of this game is the Seagulls. Mate, their form's just turned a little bit off. And I said this last week, the true test of Fosball is going to be how it fits into that week-to-week grind. Now they need to really knuckle down. And, mate, with that in mind, I think this week's game is crucial for them. This is a very ordinary Bulldogs team. It shouldn't trouble a team with top four aspirations like the Sea Eagles. I think the Eagles are going to win, but I do think it's going to be close. I think it's actually going to raise more questions than it answers, and we're still going to have those lingering things hanging over the Sea Eagles as we head into next round.
Warriors versus the Cowboys. Yeah, little slip up from the Warriors last week, but Yeah, I don't think there's anything too alarming there. It was a pretty tough game, and these guys are still quite firmly entrenched in the top four at the moment. The Cowboys, we know that they can attack from pretty much anywhere on the park. They've got quite a lot of strike, but I think the Warriors will get this one there. They're an extremely physical side. I've said a few weeks back, and they've also got a pretty good attacking machine in their team as well. And the Kiwis are playing at home. They're playing in Christchurch, so I think that's a huge advantage for the Warriors. So up the Wars for this weekend.
As with the Seagulls, I think this is a real test of the Warriors this game. They should easily dispatch the Cowboys. I mean, again, something that we've talked about. This Cowboys team, JC, they are a team of pretenders. They somehow get even more pretending away from home. And as you mentioned, the game is being played probably as far away as you can get from North Queensland in the NRL, and that's in Christchurch. I think the Warriors muscle up in this game. They were stiff in the loss against the Sharks last weekend, as we've talked about. Mate, they are going to come out in this game with a real chip on their shoulders. Andrew Webster was uncharacteristically indignant in the press conference after the game last weekend. I think that he's really been into his team. I think they're going to come out ripping and tearing. I think it's going to be a case of watch out Cowboys. I think the Warriors are going to take them apart.
Storm versus the Raiders. If you base these two sides' forms over the last few years, you'd probably say this should be a match of the round, but clearly based on form, probably
Mm.
more so the Raiders in recent weeks. Yeah, it's definitely not a match of the round contest. Melbourne, as we're starting to see, is starting to show a little bit of momentum. They're starting to build a little bit of form with a bit of a sort of mid-season surge. While, mate, the Raiders, if you ask me, they're falling off a cliff. So I can't see these guys making the top eight from here. They look gone. Whereas, as I said, Melbourne on the other hand, they're still a chance, and I think the Storm will win this one comfortably in Melbourne.
You're spot on with this game. Last year, it would have been must-watch viewing. This year, to use the parlance of the kiddies, it's a meh game. Mate, I mean, there's a couple of things that might be of interest to fans out there. Like, will the Storm continue their relatively uninspiring mini revival? From a Raiders perspective, can they play and not embarrass themselves? Now, the returning Origin players make this a little bit more interesting. Munster versus Strange should be a ding-dong battle in particular. Both of those players have a similar way of playing. They're very creative. They play off the top of their head, so that should be interesting. But man, I can't get enthusiastic about this game. I think the Storm are going to win. I think it's going to be close. Ricky always gets his boys up for their annual trips to Melbourne. He has that frenemy relationship with Bellamy. And yeah, mate, again, I don't think it's going to be much of an encounter, but I think Melbourne will actually get over them.
My boys versus the Sharks. Mate, I've got to start by saying I hope all of our Origin boys can back up for this one because we're definitely going to need them. As I mentioned earlier, mate, the Sharks were super impressive in that gritty win against the
Mm.
Warriors last start. This should be a pretty good contest, I think, at Allianz. It's actually been played at a pretty unusual time, Sunday evening at 6:15 p.m. Obviously, to probably allow all the Origin guys to have a little bit of rest. But as always, I'm tipping my boys to hopefully get the job done. We need this one because looking at the ladder at the moment, it's becoming quite congested between sort of third spot and eighth.
Mm.
So we definitely need a win just to make sure we're still within that sort of top four reach. So go my Roosters.
Both of these teams enter this game full of running. There's real top four aspirations on the line as well. The Chooks will hopefully have all of their Origin stars back in the lineup. And the Sharks, we've talked about them week in, week out, about the fact that they haven't beaten anyone good. Well, mate, over the last month, they've dusted the Seagulls and they've beaten the Warriors as well. So perhaps that gives lie to our statements that they're not real contenders. But I think the real key to this game is the forwards. Now, you'd say that the Roosters have a stronger forward pack on paper. It's loaded with Origin stars. It's loaded with internationals. But, mate, this Sharks pack, they're probably best described as raw boned. So they've got the likes of Teague Wilton. They've got Billy Burns. Mate, they have a knack of fighting and scrapping their way to wins. I'm really looking forward to the battle in the middle, mate. I think it's going to be great. I am slightly leaning towards the Sharks, but the only reason I'm doing that is I think Origin's going to have an impact on the Roosters. I think those players are going to come back, but they will probably be a little bit more gassed than than their counterparts for Cronulla. Okay, so mate, a great round preview there. I'm really looking forward to a lot of those games. But now we are on to free balling, or as I mentioned, Johnny, is it the wit and wisdom of Noz? Mate, I do have a few in the barrel for free balling. I mentioned a few weeks ago that we're going to be looking at a potted history of Phil Gould and his 5-decade run in rugby league. Mate, I also have a great one planned for a few weeks' time. It's going to be focusing on a very special milestone for one of my favourite people. Mate, I'm going to call it now. It is definitely going to veer into ridiculous tangent territory, so people can look forward to that. But today, mate, the reason we have changed it from being freeballing to a wit and wisdom is we're going to talk about a serious thing that happened over the last week of the game. And mate, for some reason, it just really affected me. I don't know why. But yeah, today, no freeballing. Sorry, guys. It is a wit and wisdom of Noz. Now, before we get started with this, JC, and I have to acknowledge it, that this could well be terrible. I've had a look at our number of subscribers on YouTube. I think we had 32 last week. I hope this doesn't plummet into the single figures after this. Maybe what I'm going to talk about here is beyond my intellectual and emotional bandwidth. I am bound to say some things that are overly simplistic, tinnied, maybe a little bit silly. Even worse, it may well be tedious virtue signalling, but I think it's something that we need to talk about, especially considering what rugby league stands for. Mate, last Monday night, Kane Evans, the ex-Rooster, Parramatta and Warriors player, appeared on the Channel 9 program 100% Football. Mate, in an interview with James Bracey, he talked about his personal journey in rugby league. He talked about the twists and turns of his life. And mate, in the interview, he came out as gay. Now, it made for some truly confronting television. Kane talked about his struggles, which included a stint with homelessness. He also talked about having to hide his sexuality. I mean, he talked about someone extorting him about his sexuality, but in particular, the toll that it actually took on him. But, mate, this part of the interview was by far the most heart-wrenching.
I had 3 goals in life, and it was to play NRL, to buy my parents a house, and then I was going to top myself. And because I was living in denial from a young age. I know that, I know that I'm gay, but I went down every other avenue to sort of build up these walls to be someone to escape who I am.
Mate, my wife actually showed that to me on Tuesday morning, and it really took me aback. When it's put in such stark terms, it's almost impossible. It's impossible as a human being not to be affected by it. He was a young bloke who was so torn by his sexual identity in the context of society's expectations, his view of himself, and the thing that he loved doing, that is footy, but that he literally had a goal to kill himself. And it exposed a few things as well. Mate, rugby league, the game that we love, mate, for better or worse, it's always stood on the fault lines of society. I mean, we talk quite a bit about this, Johnny. It is the working man's game. It was started with the really noble aim of ensuring that players got their due. But, mate, things like the Super League war, things like players walking out of contracts in the middle of them, but it sometimes makes you question that balance. The game also has at its heart a wide streak of larrikinism. And mate, that represents some of the most distinct and enjoyable aspects of our national character. However, the flip side of that is that it often has a dark underbelly of gambling, alcohol abuse, and at its worst moments, misogyny. Mate, it was only this week, JC, that we had the revelations of Ashley Klein's gambling addiction. Now, the NRL seems to be sweeping it under the carpet, but mate, it still raises a lot of questions in a sport where there are still queries and eyebrows raised over the 1978 grand final. And whether we like it or not, Johnny, homosexuality certainly fits into that category. On some levels, we've actually done a pretty good job in that typical rugby league way of just taking everything as it comes and being a wide church open to all sorts of people. Perhaps the best example of that is Ian Roberts, the Souths and Manly great. Ian was the first player to come out. He actually came out just after he left the game. And mate, at this particular juncture, he's a beloved figure in rugby league. And that's not only a reflection of his playing prowess, but also the very, very tough road that he has had to tread. Now, this one's a little bit less well known, but in 2024, there was a fantastic article in the New York Times. Probably doesn't surprise anyone considering the tone of this that I'm a subscriber to the New York Times, but they had a story about the Keighley Cougars, which is a second division team in Yorkshire in England. And mate, they were actually bought by a gay couple who added some quirky touches like drag shows and made it really lifted the town. The team was on the verge of folding. These two businessmen came in and they added a bit of colour to a town and a group of people that were really down on their luck. I'll post that story in the show notes. It's really worth a read. But Johnny, that's not the whole story. In 2022, we had the Manly Pride jersey debacle. Mate, speaking of fault lines, that situation was complicated by the religiosity of some of our game's Polynesian stars. Mate, there's also a sense, as is quite frankly throughout all of men's sports, with the rare exceptions like Isaac Humphries in the National Basketball League, that it is completely untenable for an active player to come out as being gay. Now, mate, I mentioned the fact that, again, this could be well and truly beyond me here. I've got no answers. I'm sorry if the listeners or yourself are expecting any, but mate, Kane's interview was just, it was incredibly hard to watch. As a bloke, as a father, mate, ultimately as a human being, the thought that someone is living in torment because of someone else's prejudices and phobias to the point that they want to kill themselves, mate, to me, and I think to most right-minded people, that's just unfathomable. Mate, there's been plenty of positive developments with the LGBTQ community, but mate, it's probably a wake-up call that despite the fact that we've moved to a relatively good position, there's still plenty of work to be done. But Johnny, I am going to finish on a positive note here, mate. I've been around this game for my entire life, literally since I was a toddler walking around Mascot and Maroubra in my first Parramatta jersey. Mate, the game has always been a function of its people. And mate, there are so many good people within rugby league. But when I think about this, I think of all the great coaches that I had. Jack Shaw, Glenn Dalby, I had a couple of blokes, from Marcelin, Tony Brosnan and David Stores. But I also think of all those people that ran the clubs that I was part of. People that love the game of rugby league, people that were just community-minded and gave up hours and hours of their time every week. And again, I'm thinking of Vince Waite at Brothers. I'm thinking of Barry Smith, Larry Mason, a bloke that we regularly mention on this program, Pat Bell. Mate, they are good people. And mate, it was one of the great elements of Kane's story is it was full of these good rugby league people. Mate, the first bloke, and we have to give a massive rap to him, was Joe Nullarbor. So when Kane was actually talking in his interview, he talked about the fact that Joe was there throughout all those dark times. He was literally one of the reasons that Kane didn't kill himself. And the second one was your man, Trent Robinson. Mate, we may criticise Robbo's coaching at times. We have a little bit of a laugh about the Roosters and the fact that you love them and perhaps I don't. Mate, to quote Omar, that is all in the game. But in this circumstance, mate, Robbo was a straight-up hero. He and the entire Roosters organisation just stood up and were counted in the best and possible way. So, mate, excellent effort by those two guys and indeed by all of the people in red, white and blue. But, mate, the biggest hero in this story is probably Kane himself. Mate, we can't even imagine what this poor bloke was going through. Hopefully, this will be the start of a process where he's able to find a measure of peace. Mate, hopefully we can do our small part to help him get there. So, mate, well, what did you think of the whole thing, Johnny?
Yeah, I watched the interview as well. That was super emotional, actually. As you said, I hope he's definitely at peace with coming out, letting us all know what's been happening in his life to date. I actually saw Ian Roberts the day after, and mate, I look at Ian, 20, 30 years later since he came out, and mate, he looks in great shape. He's definitely feeling good about everything. So I really hope that that Kane goes down that right path. And as you rightly said, there's a lot of support not only in the rugby league community these days, but across the board. So wishing Kane all the strength and keep going forward, mate, because you've still got a lot more to give, buddy.
Yeah, mate, as Martin Luther King says, history always arcs towards justice. So that's certainly the trajectory in which we're heading, hopefully. Okay, well, Jay, so that was a bit of a heavy story for the Wit and Wisdom this week. We'll probably have to return to freeballing in the next couple of weeks and add a little bit of levity. But we are going to bring it back with a little bit more positivity on Vox Popping, JC. Vox Popping is quickly becoming one of my favourite segments. But, mate, this week we received feedback from one of our dear old mates, Pablo Norbury. Now, mate, a few things about Norbs. Firstly, he is one of the all-time great blokes. We've known him since we've been about 8 or 9 years old, Johnny. Mate, he's always been a champion. He is also an absolute force of nature. Norbs always brings positive energy. And, mate, he sent this message through late on Sunday night. JC Noz, I just listened to NRL Offside's last episode, better late than never. Show is going well, really enjoyable, and production is coming along nicely. Congrats as both your teams won. Not sure if that's a first for 2026. I'm also not sure what show Norbs was looking for because I can't actually remember a weekend when both of our teams won. But anyway, back to Pabs. I do have to say, Nods, you could take some of JC's enthusiasm for his own team and run with it. I feel sorry for your Eels as they need you to lift them up some more. Just my opinion. Then it was hashtag any chance of a call out on air. Now, again, I am a Generation X, so I don't actually know what hashtag means, but I'm pretty sure that's not how you use it, Norbs. But absolutely, in terms of the call out, mate, there's a call out to one of our favourite people, Pablo. But, mate, it's also a catalyst for some much needed self-reflection on my behalf. Mate, maybe I do need to channel my inner Johnny. So we're going to go one better. And again, Norbs, you're the catalyst for this. Mate, next week for our round preview, I am going to preview the Parramatta game as though I am you doing a Roosters game. So, guys, it's going to be a super great-a-thon. I am going to be full of enthusiasm. Regardless of my opinions for the game, I am going to tip Parramatta. But there is a little bit of a sting in the tail here, Johnny. You have to preview the Roosters game next week like it's me doing Parramatta. So how do you reckon you're going to go with that, Johnny?
Oh, mate, you won't be seeing me do that, mate. No way. No way.
And I'm going to work on you during the week because, again, mate, sometimes you have to sacrifice for the good of the program. I also need to give a shout out to a couple of avid listeners, mates and friends of mine from work, the great Johnny Bissett, but more so his lovely partner, Amber Chen. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Just a little bit of a note to Amber, though. Can you please take over the tipping from Johnny? He has been wedged on the bottom of our tipping competition for the last 3 seasons. Sometimes he does things that even make me sort of scratch my head. So Amber, yeah, just take the pen out of Johnny's hand and do his tips week by week. What do you have for us, Johnny?
Mate, on my side, I've been doing a little bit of promoting, spruiking of our show to the younger generation. My daughter, who's 22, she had her mates over for a barbecue last week. She told me there was about 8 friends coming over, but 25 came over. So I was doing the cooking and the barbecue. There was a lot of young boys there from the local private schools, all NRL nuts. So I just shared with one our podcast, and it quickly sort of spread that we've got a podcast. So all these young boys were there downloading it on Spotify, their platform of choice. So hopefully we've got a few more young listeners going forward. I also got a bit of a laugh from our resident Tigers man, Asher. He thought it was quite funny when I referred to Keanu Kinney as the little choir boy, which, mate, he definitely does. So yeah, keep sending your stuff through, Ash. We love it. And then as you mentioned, Neil, our resident Swiss listener, sent a message after the last episode saying what a great opener to the show last week. Mate, I'll be honest, and I was like, I can't even remember what we said, but mate, let's run with it because, mate, Neil's our ideas man, so we need to be positive about anything that Neil says. And just to finish my little bit, I just want to just make mention of a really sad situation that happened on Saturday down at my local Coogee Beach. We all would have heard the news about the shark attack. I really hope that the young mother pulls through, and really wish her the best and speediest recovery. That was really tough news for the local area. We all love and swim down at Coogee regularly, so hopefully that hasn't brought too much fear to the community. And as I said, I really, really hope the young mother comes out of this as best as possible. So our thoughts with her and the family.
Exactly. Now, mate, in terms of going back to Noel's feedback, remembering what we said, I can't remember what I said 3 minutes ago. Mate, Norbs is making me self-reflect. I'm a middle-aged man. I don't like too much reflection. But that's the end of the program for today. Remember, guys, we have our Schmicko new feedback emails. So jc@nrloffside.com, noz@nrloffside.com. Send through your thoughts. We have plenty of good ones coming through, guys, but it's always really nice to hear from the listeners. Subscribe as well. So if you're watching on YouTube, just click the little subscribe button. Let's see if we can build up from 32. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music, same thing. Just click the follow button to make sure that we hit your feed every week. But that's the end of this week's program, guys. Thank you very much to our listeners for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Have a great week, listeners. Go the Blues.